And welcome back to the Early Bird Special. I'm Chris Burdick. With me, as always, my co-host Sparky, and it's once again time to wreck your waiver wire. We are in Week 8 of the NFL, a special week as there are no bye weeks this week, and we are looking about, I guess you would say, halfway through your fantasy football season, right, Spark?
Yep, that'd be, yeah, pretty much.
Roughly
Most
about
leagues
there.
go like week 13 is when we usually do.
I think we
Uh,
go to 15 this year, right? In the ones that we're in, something like
no,
that.
because I take 18, so we go 14, 15,
Oh, okay.
16, 17. Yeah. Playoffs
So
start
it's
in week
14.
15.
Ah, okay. That would make sense. Okay. So yeah, you're about halfway through your fantasy football leagues here, and hopefully you've gotten some good picks from us in the past weeks. I know we've had a couple big or a couple good choices, a couple stinkers as well. We're human as everybody else is, but we will get right into this, and hopefully these week 8 picks will help you out. First and foremost, let's start with quarterbacks. Personally, I'm going to start with a bench or a drop for myself. Not necessarily a drop, more of a bench if you have him on your rosters. But Sam Darnold this week for the Minnesota Vikings would kind of stay away from Sam this week. He's coming from off back-to-back really struggling weeks. And he's going into a short week on Thursday against the Rams, who are a sneakily good front seven. Personally, I just think I'm going to follow my traditional rules here. Don't touch anybody on Thursday and don't touch London games when it comes to fantasy football. So at this point in my thought process, that means stay away from some Viking players. Obviously, guys like Justin Jefferson will still get you some points, but Sam Darnold most likely is going to have an off week. I think you could probably find something better there. What say you, Spark?
I agree. I usually stay away from the Thursday games, especially unless it's, one of your first top picks. I've been hurting with quarterbacks. I have Darnold in a league or two, and I've been bouncing back with him and Kirk Cousins. So I'm leaning on Kirk Cousins this week. And last week we were talking about, I have Mahomes. I have the Mahomes problem. And this last week I went with Aaron Rodgers, which in the first half I thought was going to be a fucking gold home run, like boom, baby. And that shit ended just as looked as Mahomes. So I mean, once he started throwing those picks, I was like, oh my God. And usually I like to play players in primetime games. And I'll start with quarterbacks that I think, and I know a lot of people are already talking about him, but I have two quarterbacks this week, and one is just a mention. My start as a quarterback pickup this week is be obviously Russell Wilson. After that game on Sunday night, he looked good. He ripped apart the Jets. Yeah, he started slow, but what the hell? I mean, the guy hasn't played since December of last year. So, I mean, I was surprised. I mean, especially because I have to mute the TV on Sunday nights because I cannot stand Chris Collinsworth. But after that first moonshot right into Pickens, which I will say, if you have Pickens, which I know me and Burdick have been, on the fence about Pickens, but it looks like as long as Russell's playing like that, Pickens is back in the groove. So Russell Wilson is one that I would say he's mostly picked up in 2% of leagues right now, which I think a lot of waiver wires, Russell Wilson will
Hmm.
probably be the guy to pick up. But if you want to be sneaky, I like Bo Nix this week. He is playing the Carolina Panthers, and he isn't had been the best, but as a rookie, he's been averaging 15 to 18 points in fantasy, and he's playing the Panthers. So if you need a quarterback, and a lot of quarterbacks, I know we're going to get into injuries, but injuries hit hard this week with
Hmm.
quarterbacks. So those are the two quarterbacks I have. What do you think, Burdick?
Honestly, Bo Nix was one of mine from last week. I personally think he's really starting to get it. I know he didn't do amazingly last week like we were thinking. It was on Thursday against the Saints, and the defense really led the Broncos to that win. But realistically speaking, Bo has really progressed throughout the week. And I think you're right. I think this week, much like your Bigsby pick, I think I was just a week off. I think Bo might have a real big week this week. Russell was my pickup of the week as well. 16 for 29 against the Jets, 267 yards total, three total touchdowns. He was only sacked one time against a really, really good Jets defense. And honestly, As long as Tomlin says he's number one, he's the number one, and I don't think that's going to change. They're going into Monday, going against the Giants, who are weak as hell in the secondary outside of a handful of good pass rushers. And in my personal opinion, though, Sparky, I mean, we saw it during the game, and I've gotten text messages from Pittsburgh fans just watching the game saying, "Oh, Russ is washed, Russ is this,"
Mm-hmm.
and then outbreaks Russ's entire second half and really shuts up the entire fan base and makes them believe again. But
Uh-huh.
is Danger Russ real? Are we back to being the Russ of old, or
Dude,
do
I'm
you
glad you
think,
said that. I'm glad
or
you
do
said
you?
Danger Russ. Have you seen that post yet?
Yes,
He's got his own
absolutely,
hamburger now already in
and dude, and
Pittsburgh.
this man has been able ever since he left Seattle has been trying to market himself. Okay, Mister
Mm-hmm.
Unlimited and all that type. I get it,
Oh yeah.
but realistically speaking, we're talking about this right now. Tomlin has a choice here in the next couple weeks, in my opinion, because you've already seen in the first few weeks that Justin could win football games for you,
Four
and
and
we've now
two.
seen that Russ has won you one. So who do you think the Pittsburgh Steelers when it comes to playoff time? Because we're talking right now, Pittsburgh looks like they're in the playoffs, and I'm just going to say it. They won't win the division because you have to go against the Baltimore Ravens to do that, and that's very hard to do. But
Well,
Pittsburgh
that is
most
one.
likely will swipe a wild card spot. So who do you think is going to be the starting
Well,
quarterback at that point?
that's one thing I did pay attention to with Tomlin in the press conferences the last couple of weeks. Tomlin had said that, you know, if Justin comes back, Justin's the guy. So this is his chance. So the next 2 or 3 weeks between the Giants, I didn't look at the full schedule, but I did see the breakdown. So they have a bye week, I believe, after the Giants.
Yes,
So I believe, and then I want to say they play Cleveland, but either way, they haven't played any division teams so far this year, which
and
is
that's a
really
really tough
strange.
division. It's
So
incredibly hard to win in the North.
Coach Tomlin said that he's going to give Wilson enough rope to hang himself, and he wants to know who his quarterback is by the time they start hitting these division games because that's when the season's really going to start for them. If they're going to
Mm-hmm.
win that division, they're going to have to beat Cincy. They're going to have to beat Baltimore, and there's some tough matchups. So I personally, we've only seen one game. I think I think Russ can run this offense,
Mm-hmm.
especially if those running backs with Jalen and Najee keep running the ball like they have. And that defense, dude. Anything with Tomlin's Pittsburgh's defense, which I'm kind of jealous because four of those players were in the Dolphins the last 2 years. So I'm like, the safety Deshaun Elliott, who leads the Steelers in tackles, was our safety last year, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
see him play anything like that. Which it goes with coaches and the schemes. But I personally think Russell has a chance. I do like Justin Fields though. But it's a good problem to have. Trust me, as a Dolphin fan, I'm looking at Tim Boyle and Snoop went down with an injury this last week. So I wish him the best. And it'd be nice to see Pittsburgh and Baltimore go at it for that division.
Oh, it's going to be something to see at the end of the year. I still say Baltimore is a better team overall, but I mean, since we're already talking about it, let's get into the second talking points I have here. Baltimore Ravens on Monday come out and absolutely just shellac the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, Tampa Bay lose their top two receivers, obviously, and are absolutely strapped. We'll get into the receiver situation. I know Sparky's got one, but do you think there's anybody on the list right now in the NFL that could beat the Ravens? Because personally, I don't even think the Chiefs can beat the Ravens if they play like this.
Uh, it's so hard to make predictions this far out. Not only one is because you can see a team that, in Tampa, that first quarter, I thought Tampa was going to steal that game. And then the Ravens started getting, comfortable. And then, 5 touchdowns later from Lamar and another 80-yard run from Henry, which I love the guy, man. And seeing him get pissed in the post game talking about he was mad that he didn't have the speed to get that touchdown in that 82-yard run or whatever it was. Um, I like the Ravens and not as a fan, but I would rather see them than Kansas City. Lamar's done a lot of work, but anything could happen in one week. Tampa was, what, 4-2, 5-2 last night before they lost. And not only did they lose, but they lost their number one and number two receivers, which is going to hurt a lot of people in fantasy.
It's going to let my Falcons walk their happy asses right to a championship. Anywho, but we'll get back to our picks here real quick. Moving into the running back situation, I got one for you to look at or at least pick up this week. Rico Dowdle from the Dallas Cowboys. Now I know Dallas's running game has been absolutely god awful to start out the season, and rightfully so. I mean, the splitting of the carries between Dowdle and Zeke has not really worked out whatsoever. However, the thing that really gets me now, Dowell's 35 or 35th when it comes to running backs. He's rostered in 53% of your leagues this year and has yet to have a rushing touchdown so far this year. That's pretty interesting. That's, you know what I'm saying? And I know that's a very bad indicator when it comes to being a running back. However, he has two through the air and gets plenty of touches through the air. So if you were in a PPR league and you need somebody to fill that flex spot, especially maybe you have an injury or two and you need somebody to fill that spot, I think Dowdle is right on the edge of getting not only that first rushing touchdown, but really breaking out and getting something going because he's just done a very good job of really keeping that just floundering running game going for the Dallas Cowboys. And right now they're taking on a very diminished Niners defense. They won't have Fred Warner most likely when they play. So I think really when you're looking at it going forward, Dowdle might actually have a solid game going forward or coming up. I apologize.
I went real deep, like real bottom of the ocean deep, and I looked at Ray Davis from Buffalo. I know Cook is back in the lineup, but I like his matchups for the last 2 weeks. Davis still managed to make in PPR leagues 2 10+ fantasy games. So, I mean, if you're really searching for somebody this week, which luckily this year I'm not running back hungry, but after these injuries, I am fishing for receivers. And another one I wanted to throw out is Tyler Goodson in Indy. If Jonathan Taylor misses another game, Goodson looked good last week. Yeah, he was playing Miami, and they both sucked. And I'm not going to pull one from the other, but Goodson in the second half, which I believe he had under 40 or 50 yards, but you could tell by the end of the game, that's the guy they'll run with if Jonathan Taylor doesn't play.
You know, I'm glad you brought up Goodson because actually my stay away from or drop for this week is all Colts running
Colts.
backs. Every single one of them. Sermon, Goodston, all of them. Don't touch these. In my opinion, if you can listen to Spark, you listen to me. Personally, I've had no luck with these guys outside of JT. If JT is not their starter, you're not going to get points from a running back from the Colts. And realistically speaking, they're going into a really tough game against the Houston Texans, one of the better front sevens in the NFL. And they're definitely going to lean on the passing game on the offensive side if you were the Colts, because the secondary of Houston is where they really are a little skeptical, which is shocking to say the least, especially with some of the great young corners that they have on that team.
If you're going to talk Colts,
yeah,
Flacco will be playing in that game before it's over with because Anthony Richardson looks like shit.
He's coming in. You got to remember that Anthony did not play a whole ton of football, and that does not bode well in the NFL. I know people like to believe that you could take an athlete and put them into the NFL and they'll do well. We've seen it with Mitchell Trubisky. We've seen it now with Anthony Richardson. If you do not have the experience to put behind it, especially at the quarterback position, because I think that's why Bo Nix is really starting to get it. Bo Nix has played more college ball than any other quarterback possible. And that, I think, is why he came into Sean Payton's offense, is starting to get it now and is starting to bounce back, especially after a rough start if you're a Denver Bronco. So realistically speaking, you're looking at a guy like Richardson. I think you're right. I think he needs to sit behind a guy like Flacco for a year or two and really learn how to run that offense, because they're there. Don't get me wrong. There are pieces there that they can really move and make it work, but you need that quarterback. And Richardson shows flashes of being a really good one, but until he gets that experience and gets the knowledge to back it up, I think you're right.
Just listening to these announcers just drooling all over the guy, and he was like 7 for 25 with like 46 yards. I was like, what the hell are they seeing that I'm not seeing?
Because of the potential, though. The potential he shows. I mean, remember Cam. Cam wasn't exactly the greatest quarterback per se when he came into Carolina, but he had a great running ability, he had a great physical ability, and he had great throwing ability, all things that Anthony has. So it's possible that Anthony could put it together in the coming years, but as of right now, I have to agree with you. It's pretty rough in Indy, so I would stay away from them once again, at least in the run game. If you got somebody in the pass game, I would probably Michael Pittman might have a solid game this week. That's a possibility, but in my personal opinion, I'd steer clear of anybody.
I'd steer away from anybody. But if like I said, I picked up who was the first one? Sherman. I picked up Sherman the first week Jonathan Taylor was out, and I didn't have the balls to start him. And of course, he scores. So I cut him after that. I'm like, I don't want even want to look at his name because I know if I start him, he's going to get shit. And if I don't,
Right.
I'd rather just lose him in free agency. But speaking of injuries and my receiver, really, it's a flip of a coin. A lot of players, a lot of teams that rely on, the Godwins and the Mike Evans, which, Godwin got me 44 points the week before. So I
Mhm.
was like, hell yeah, I have to roll with him. And now that he's hurt, which sadly, that's a big chunk of Tampa. That offense runs with those two dudes. Maybe, just maybe, look at this one. Jalen McMillan. Say who? Jalen McMillan. He is the now number one receiver for Tampa Bay, 0.2% in fantasy. So I'm sure his family is that 2% that drafted their kid in their fantasy. But somehow there's not enough tape to make this kid, to make that move and feel good about it. But if you're hurting for a receiver, this guy just moved up to a receiver one. If you're not counting Otten at tight end, which I'm sure he will get his fantasy points out of anything. But I don't know if you had any other receivers. I
I
was
got a
going to bring
couple.
up Pittman is to stay away from Pittman just because I've watched enough tape with Anthony Richardson. But I'm thinking I steer away from Colts receivers until they make that move official with Flacco coming back.
Oh, 110%. The numbers for the Colts receivers goes up tremendously when Flacco is the quarterback. So I agree with you 100% there. But personally, when it comes to receiver for me, I have two you should look at. Alan Lazard from the Jets. Personally, I like this kid. Don't get me wrong. He's the number 12 receiver right now in terms of points. He averages about 16 a game. He's only rostered in 48% of leagues. So about half of you could probably pick him up right now. And they're taking on New England this week, who's a pretty weak secondary. And not to mention, consistency kills in fantasy football. Alan Lazard and Aaron Rodgers have a chemistry just as good as Aaron Rodgers does with Devontae Adams. And personally, it's just been that kind of target thing for him all year, especially with Mike Williams most likely be on the way out. I personally think this connection is going to thrive even more with the Jets going forward. And then the other one to look out for, you saw him on Monday. I think it was coming out party finally. I've been waiting for this guy to finally show up. But Rashad Bateman for the for the Ravens. If you have a chance to pick this guy up, he is a big threat on all routes, realistically, especially deep routes. And I think if he could really figure out how to get a good connection going with Lamar, he could be that receiver that the Ravens have desperately needed. Now, Zay Jones has also had flashes of being that guy, but one of these two has to make that leap. It really has to become that situation because we now know with all of the receivers that have been out there, especially with Cooper Kupp still out there, I am starting to believe that there is zero chance going forward, period, that we ever see a top line receiver be traded for by Baltimore. And honestly, at this point, I think they believe that either Rashad Bateman or Zay Jones could be that guy for them. And honestly, watching Monday going against a very, very good secondary in Tampa Bay, Rashad showed a lot of promise to me. So if you have a chance to pick up either Rashad Bateman or Alan Lazard, personally, I think you should take a shot at it at least. You could do worse, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I just cut Lazard after the Devontae Adams pickup, but I should have looked at the schedule because I didn't know they were going to play this Patriots this early. And even without Devontae and without Brees Hall before he was getting hot,
Well,
they
and
they spanked him by like 3 or 4 touchdowns earlier in the season.
let's also not forget though that Devontae and Aaron have not played together in years. It's not
Hmm.
like they were just on the same team as if this was Derek and Devontae getting back together. So
Yeah.
you have to take time for that connection to restart. And again, like I said, Mike Williams is on the way out, which means Allen's now the number two in New York. So that means he's going to
Well,
get
three.
plenty of opportunities.
Well,
Who's
because
over?
he'll be Garrett Wilson.
Oh, Garrett. I'm sorry. You're right. Garrett Wilson's there. So yeah, Allen will most likely be the three. I apologize. You're
But
correct.
Lazard, Garrett Wilson got his catches this last week, but the more they get comfortable with him, Lazard is always going to be that guy that gets his PPR points. I don't care
Yes.
how many receivers, Lazard is almost had a touchdown every week.
And
So
again,
I would keep an eye on
16
him.
points averaged a week for a
Mhm.
receiver. is really good. And the fact that he is only rostered in half the league and his top dozen receivers in
It's
PPR
crazy.
leagues. That's nuts. That's absolutely ridiculous. And then the last guy that I have on my list here, Spark, and it's in the tight end category. Oh, I'm sorry. I do have a defense here as well, but we'll get into that in a second. One guy to stay away from this week for me, Cole Kmet for the Chicago Bears. Look, I know he's high up there in terms of ranking when it comes to tight ends. I think he's probably around 4 to 6 somewhere in your leagues. It's inconsistency across the board. He's had 2 games of over 20 points, but outside of that, he has not done much. And when he goes against really tough defenses, much like what he's going to be going against this week with Washington, he struggles. He does not do
Mhm.
well. And Chicago likes to throw to the receivers more than they like to throw to him. So personally, if I am a tight end owner and you have Cole Kmet on your roster, I'd say stay away. Probably go try to pick up somebody else.
If you are trying to pick up somebody, yes, it's a Patriot, but I would look at Hunter Henry. Ever since Drake May has been in the mix, he's led the team in targets and has had 15.2 points every week. That's his average for the last 2 or 3 weeks since Drake May has arrived. And yes, I would play with Hunter Henry. I did lose a tight end this last week with Dallas Goddard, and
Mm,
luckily, if you're fishing, I will say TJ Hawkinson for the Vikings is sitting in a lot of fantasy free agent pools, and he is supposed to be back this week. He was actually going to play this last week, but the coach is like, nah, we'll wait another week because it was a Thursday game. But TJ Hawkinson he might be the TJ Hawkinson that was before, but I'd rather take a shot with him than what you were saying with Komet. And my last one is the Ravens defense after last night's game. They're playing the Cleveland Browns without Watson, and I almost feel stupid because sadly they've only picked up 38% in most leagues, and the Ravens defense hasn't scored a lot of points in fantasy. So when I was looking it up, it's been a characteristically rough season for Baltimore. They usually are a top five defense, and they haven't scored 10 points in fantasy. But this will be the week. I promise that. 10
yeah,
points, it's your lock in. They're playing the Cleveland Browns. And it looks like, sadly, it doesn't look like Winston is going to be starting.
I was wondering that myself. I think they are probably going to make that announcement sometime in the later part of this week. I think Jameis will end up being the starter though.
That's what I would
They
think.
do like the young guy from UCLA.
Cable Jones.
Yeah, but I don't think that it's going to go down to that. I think that experience is going to end up being what goes forward. What I would be worried about if I'm a Cleveland Browns fan is these players giving up on the fans because after the reactions from the fans last week, I don't think the players like that very well at all. And I
No.
don't think they're going to respond to that very well at all. So if you were a Cleveland Browns fan, I'd be worried about that more than anything.
Uh-huh.
I'd like to
And I
pick
wouldn't be
though.
surprised if Miles Garrett gets traded because now I'm hearing his name all over the place. I'm like,
Atlanta.
oh, okay.
Just
I've
saying. Anyways,
I've seen that and Pittsburgh. But what you want to
uh,
wrap up with?
And my last pick is another surprise pick, and now actually a surprise for me, but the Green Bay Packers defense, the number 4 defense in PPR leagues, believe it or not, is only rostered in 57% of those leagues, and every single one of those rosters is starting them this week, and there's a good reason for it. 20 sacks, 9 interceptions, 8 fumble recoveries in the first few weeks of the season. This defense is quietly rolling and it's going to continue. It's going to just be a incredible ride for I think this Green Bay Packer team. This defense has been able to lead this team even with Jordan Love being hurt through the vast majority of the time because let's be honest, it was not Malik Willis and I'm not going to I find it very hard to believe that the number 4 ranked defense in the NFL in terms of PPR fantasy is not picked up by almost 36 or I'm sorry 33% of our leagues, almost 43% of the
Mhm.
leagues. That's pretty wild to me. So, realistically looking at it, if you got a chance to pick up the Green Bay Packers defense, once again, like I've said all show, you could do a lot worse. And at this
Yes.
point, if you're holding on to somebody who's ranked around 40 or something like that because you're waiting for his breakout week, it's never going to happen. I'm sorry, it's not happening. And moving into that, mostly because we can talk about this injury going into the injury report to end this video, but that moves into somebody like Brandon Ayuk, who
Ooh.
unfortunately is out for the rest of the year. Personally, I was one of those guys who was waiting for Brandon Ayuk's breakout week. It did not happen, unfortunately, and will not happen for the rest of the season. But Sparky, What other injuries have we seen from this week that people should look out for?
Oh, I mean, I don't know about Jaden Daniels if he's going to be suiting up with with Ayuk. That one kind of hurt, and I've seen a lot of the rumor mill. You know, Frisco was high on Cortland Sutton before they actually re-signed Ayuk. I've heard a lot that the Niners might be shopping for a receiver. I don't know because it looks like if the Niners drop another game, they're looking up like this season might be over. And I've also heard, that McCaffrey could be back at practice next week after this week's game. So, I mean, really, with McCaffrey's history, do you throw a guy in there like that? I mean, I know Debo's 50-50 this week already. Kittle left the game with another injury. These guys are dropping. I wouldn't be surprised if their left tackle gets suspended a game or two for throwing a punch last week. Um, I mean, it's just been a weird season, and I'm happy because
Super
I like Jaden
uncharacteristic
Daniels.
too. Super
Trent Williams.
uncharacteristic of Trick to throw that punch. Like he's usually the calm, collective one from what I have seen in his career. And now I know it was a really rough game for them against the Chiefs,
Mhm.
and I know that the Chiefs get a lot of leeway from refs, and I'm sure there was plenty of it going that way.
Oh
I didn't get to
yes.
watch the whole game, but I was just shocked. I have not seen him throw a punch in a game in
When he
quite
was
some time.
pissed.
I know. Well, I know he gets pissed, and I know he does not. He doesn't let people do that to him. Like he's one of those guys that will not take grief on the field. I'm sure he's the best
Mhm.
tackle in football and has been for quite some time. But to see him lose his composure like that and throw a punch was just wild.
And I am looking forward to, as a Dolphin fan, Tua is supposedly going to be suiting up this weekend. I've read everything that you can think of. I've watched his press conference 50 times. As a Tua fan, I am super excited, not only because I was kind of nervous. Okay, what kind of Tua are we going to get? The guy's got a fucking backbone, and I'm happy to see that he's coming with an attitude that he wants to play. They asked him, one of the questions from a reporter was, a lot of experts or um, fantasy people were saying that you should retire. He said, I never thought that, not once. And number two, I don't listen to you guys. I'm a damn grown ass man. And I knew the second day after the concussion, after he felt 100%, that he wasn't walking away from football. Plus, there's a big ass check waiting on him. So, on top of that, he does have to clear one more step of the concussion protocol, but the coach seems to think that over the last 4, actually 5 weeks, because Miami had a bye week, that he will have no problem getting over that last step with the protocol, which we need him very bad because anybody that's watched the Dolphins in the last 5 weeks, um, last week was they almost beat the Colts, and Waddle and Tyreek together had 2 receptions for 13 yards. And I can wait. I mean, that offense, sadly, Mike McDaniel has put everything in on his quarterback and running that offense. And you can't teach that Shanahan type offense in 4 weeks. You can't just pick up a guy off the Ravens practice squad and expect him to be a Pro Bowl quarterback. I'm expecting, to Miami to take it slow. Mostert and A-Chain has ran the ball well, but last week those 2 fumbles that really don't happen very often with Miami lost that game for them. After Mostert's first fumble and then A-Chain, or actually it was Ingold that had the second fumble, that game was over. That defense, Calais Campbell and Jonnu Smith had surprisingly hell of a last month. They've pretty much led the team in receptions and tackles. So thank you, Falcons.
You're welcome.
But I will say, if if you're hurting for a receiver and you had Tyreek and or Waddle and you've had to ride out this last month for 1 or 2 point weeks, I would expect the offense to not go back to normal, but obviously go back to a rhythm where it's fast paced and a lot more passing. I'm hoping, but one good thing is they're playing the Cardinals, which isn't a pushover, but it should be a good setup game because next week after this Arizona game, Miami is at playing Buffalo. So if they better get their shit together if they think they're gonna do anything this season. Um, And luckily, the Jets lost on Monday, or actually Sunday night game. Miami's above the Jets with a half a game. Miami's 2-4, and the Jets are 2-5. So, I mean, the season's not over. There's still 12, 13 games left in the NFL regular season. So that will how I will wrap up my injury and this week. Hopefully, we'll see the Tua man, the Samoan, come back and hopefully get this team a win.
From your lips to God's ears, my friend. But I mean, I'm excited to see Tua play again. I hope that we see the last of Tua getting a concussion in any type of football or athletic incident whatsoever. But we will see what we will see as this week finishes up on Sunday. Or I'm sorry, on Monday. We are done here for the week. However, thank you for listening. Hope you will join us back here next week. Like and subscribe, share this video with whoever you want. We'll be back here later on this week with a wrestling video for you as we break down the newest season of the Dark Side of the Ring series, which was released on Hulu this past week. Kimball Woods will also be joining us, so look out for that. But until
Acknowledge
then,
me.
yeah, well, the Fatu has actually showed up on Monday too. I can't wait to talk to him about that too. That's
Yes.
been this entire thing is really starting to heat up on the wrestling side. So we hope you will
Mhm.
join us for that as well here later on this week. But until then, thank you everybody for watching. We'll see you later. Peace out.